Welcome to the Jay Martin Show. If you are new to the show, my name is Jay. I'm an investor looking for the smartest home for my cash. Maybe that's just like you. If it is, I think you're going to like what we do here. Now, today, my guest is Jeff Booth, who is a serially successful entrepreneur, investor, and author, deep macro thinker, and crowd favorite here on the show. We cover a handful of topics today. We begin by talking about asking the question, what stage might we be in terms of the life cycle of the United States empire and the US dollar as the world reserve currency? Because that is one of the most popular questions that is being asked on my show and on most of my peers' shows as well, is what's next? What's after the US dollar when it comes to world reserve currencies? And you can go a handful of directions with that. You can go towards CBDCs or cryptocurrencies or gold standards or BRICS alternative currencies, something like this, right? But Jeff points to the fact that that might not be the smartest question to ask. The reason we ask that question is because if you look at the recent history of currencies, you see, the Dutch guilder owning the 17th century. You look at the British pound owning the 19th century, the US dollar owning the 20th century. So the logical question is who's going to own the 21st, right? But Jeff says, look, you're missing the point. What will happen next is a complete disruption of how we understand world currencies to operate on the back of emerging and disruptive technologies. So, fascinating conversation with Jeff, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Now, I want to mention that a lot of my viewers are gold investors, as am I. And many gold investors have an aversion to listening to Bitcoin-centric commentary. And as you're going to learn in a minute here, Jeff is an advocate for a Bitcoin standard. But what I want to say to you is when you turn a blind eye to the assets you don't like or don't want to understand, you're the only one that gets hurt. And if you want to be on Team Gold or Team Bitcoin or Team Real Estate, and you want to love that asset, the only promise I can make you is that asset will never love you back. All right. And when you put up walls against content you don't like or that offends your theories and philosophies, you open up your own blind spots massively. So I don't know what's around the corner. I absolutely do not know what's around the corner. And so I want to hear as many perspectives as possible. And I want to hedge my bets and have exposure to as many lifeboats as possible as we go through whatever transition I believe we're going to keep going through for the balance of my lifetime as the geopolitical chessboard continues to be shaken up. So anyways, I know you're going to enjoy this. I certainly did. I learned a ton, so maybe you will as well. Last thing, as always, I write a weekly Substack. It comes out every Sunday. I love writing it. Even though I'm an investor and I manage a portfolio of companies and cash, what I write about is managing my mind, right? Which is the most important tool in every investor's toolkit, is understanding your own heuristics and biases and blind spots and what leads to good and bad decision-making. I get phenomenal feedback and I love writing it. I'd love to have you join the team. Hit that link beneath this piece of content and you'll hear from me in your inbox every Sunday. Here is Jeff Booth. Enjoy.
This is Jay Martin.
Okay, here I am with Jeff Booth. Jeff, it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, no problem at all, Jay. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm excited to chat with you. So here's where I want to begin. I want to start with kind of a bigger question, and then we'll drill down from there if I can. I want to ask you about the life cycle of empire. And if you were to think through like the various dynasties in China, the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, now the American Empire, at their height, every citizen probably always feels like the sun will never set, right, on our empire. Could you give me your take on where we might be, if you have a take, where we might be in the life cycle of the American empire today?
Yeah, I don't think there'll be a reserve currency like the reserve currency of the US holds over the world again in as we play this forward. Some might mistakenly view that differently, as that's going to be replaced by China, but I suspect that is not going to happen. I think economics always drives empires, and it all the way back to Roman times or Greek times, and if whether those economics are built first on, I have more power than you, and I can take your power, or my military is stronger, and I can seize your gold and your wealth from your country or raw materials. But then those empires typically do the same thing that all empires do. It's kind of that choice to be part of that gets eroded, and it gets eroded typically from a monetary base. The economy can't serve all of the people the same. So what the leaders do, or the people closest to when it was gold or clipping coins, they debase the currency and they make people poorer over time, and it leads to the end of the empire. Um, so my take on that whole thing is it's actually always been driven by technology, or predominantly technology, and why and when you had an inflationary monetary system that had to grow against technology that was supposed to be able to kind of bring more for less, um, you would start to move apart from the real world, and you'd start to mask that, and then it would get more. So a long term debt cycle is actually a function of getting worse and concentrating more and more control into debt that can't be repaid, because technology is actually moving the other way. And so back in Roman times, that might have happened every 600 years, where you'd have a debt cycle reset. And now it happens a lot faster because technology is moving faster.
And so let me ask you then, because you brought up an interesting comment. You said, I don't think there will ever be a reserve currency the way we think about it again after the US dollar. And to add some perspective to that, the concept of a reserve currency isn't that old, right? The Dutch guilder was kind of the first. The Portuguese real in advance of that was like a maritime currency used globally, and the Spanish currency before that, but not in any shape the way that we know a reserve currency to be. The Dutch guilder was really the first, and that was not that long ago, right? We've had the Dutch guilder, the British pound, obviously the American dollar, and that's maybe a 400-year history. It's not that extensive, and so you have to think that also came on the back of a world that was much more fragmented. You go back 500, 700 years ago. Even the Dutch Empire was the global superpower, but lots of the world from their shores was still unexplored, and the world was not nearly as small as it is today. We've consolidated the way we communicate and explore, which has allowed America to be the kind of power it is. But so if there's what happens next, do you see a next evolution of what a global superpower is, therefore, as we've now got this new sort of idea of what reserve currency is, global superpower, but that's constantly evolving.
I think it's such a radical departure from what most people would think on your show, from most people's frame of reference, because their frame of reference includes everything in the past, and the past never had the things that we're moving into, specifically Bitcoin. It never had something that could be decentralized and secure, and it served all of us instead of a small number of us. So without that, if something for the first time had decentralization and security, and it never existed before, and the winners write the history books, then you can guarantee all of human history up till this point has a flaw in the way that we think about history. And it comes down to people's perception of what won that piece. And typically what ends up happening is money is superordinate than laws. It's more powerful. So laws get changed by people who have the most money and can lobby or put in their judges, or their favor them over and change the laws. And if it didn't look like that, then you would expect all over the world where money was most broken, you'd expect to have the best personal property laws and best rights and freedoms. It looks opposite, right? That's because money is superordinate to laws. But because we never had something like Bitcoin before, we required institutions to serve the purpose of trust. So a bank, or a government body, or any of the institutions that we count on today serve the purpose of trust, because we had to centralize some of that in institutions and then enact laws to protect us from the institutions. So that would be what the Constitution would look like. That would be like what the Magna Carta looked like. And what those constitutions or laws enshrined in property rights and people's individual rights and freedoms, they produced stronger economies because there were more shots on nets from the free market to produce more opportunities. And so those free markets created created stronger economies. And then over time, but if money is broken, again, that goes away. And you can see all around the world, it goes away when money is most broken. So the question is money broken today? And we can see all it is a ledger. I'm going to go a little deeper just on this topic and I'm going to take a different angle into it. If you think about human coordination, we're all connected all over the world, right? For our batteries to run our Teslas, they come from cobalt in Africa, in West Africa. And if those people weren't paid $2 a day, you couldn't drive your Tesla. And so that connection to labor all over the world is and if you can essentially make somebody else's labor cheaper through monetary policy and drive their wages down, where you export your inflation to them or wage deflation to them, then you can capture their gains for a while. But it doesn't last forever. And so here's the other take I would say. Human history, us as part of human history, we're all we are is energy, storage, and compute. That's what your mind is. That's what your body is. It's limited energy, limited storage, limited compute. We stitch that together through money so that other people can do other things and you don't have to do everything in your life to be able to provide the service to your life. So that's trust in money. And that's that abstraction that we stitch together so that we can coordinate human labor. Now we can each be a piece of the economic puzzle and do more and more things. Well, somebody could be a butcher, somebody else could be a baker, and you can make that work and you can divide labor through trust in money. So that creates that limited energy, limited storage, limited compute into a supercomputer, which is us. When that supercomputer breaks down, when you have breakdown in trust, in fact, look at it again back to money. If that's a layer that holds it together, look at a big city. So bigger cities have more compute before the internet. Bigger cities had more compute, and so people moved from the small towns to the bigger cities because there was more going on, and it feeds back. And you look at the power law of different cities and to towns, you can see what happens. But then ask yourself the opposite question to that, and you say, what about a big city where with really broken money? And you can see there's no compute. It breaks down. So that whole thing, and it's actually another piece of that thing you asked about empires, is also driven by us searching for higher forms of energy, more energy. So the sun never set on the British sail or flag was a result of them finding coal as a form of energy, a higher form of energy, before others had. In the US, a big portion of the US's strength was them driving to oil before others. So higher forms of energy. So any one of those three, kind of higher form of energy, higher form of storage, which books were a higher form of storage. So the printing press, when we drove into, we could export our mind into massive storage and then drive more compute against what other people said. So any one of those three independently has this huge phase change in society, but all three taken together obviously have a massive change to society. So that's if you just follow that logic and where we are now in computers in storage and compute are doing things better than we can. And so powering that is a huge phase change that most people don't realize because they're measuring the phase change from within the phase change, and they can't see what's happening. And to me, that's why I've become kind of quite an active proponent in Bitcoin, is because it's outside of that system, decentralized and secure, with no counterparty risk, that as long as is and again, a different way into this technology, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. It's well known in economics. No matter what you do over a long enough time horizon, prices fall to the marginal cost of production. You can protect an industry in your country for a little while through protectionism, but the competition still moves on outside your borders, and prices continue to fall, and then your industry and your borders is uncompetitive to the rest of the world. So prices fall to the marginal cost of production, and some of the marginal cost of production now is a line of code. And some of that line of code so it's free. And some of that line of code is being now written by computers, so it's free. So now you have prices fall to the marginal cost of production. You have exponentially increasing productivity driven by the same thing.
Yeah.
By us moving more and more to computers, which can do it faster, better than us, and seeing patterns that we couldn't see. And the only thing that could measure, so that means just as a derivative of that, you would expect out of what I just said, prices falling exponentially on all things. That's a logical person would say, by deduction, these two main prices should be falling exponentially. Why aren't they? Because we live in a system with a ledger that is, the denominator is changing radically. And people are measuring all prices by the error code in the denominator changing. Yes. And they think that's the accurate system. Whereas the new system in Bitcoin, it's probably not even fair to say prices are rising. It's probably prices are only rising when measured in your ledger that is wrong. What's actually happening in Bitcoin is all prices are falling against it and will forever, as long as the security model, the decentralization and the security model of Bitcoin doesn't break. So if that stays constant, now you can question that assumption. Will it fail? How will it fail? What would happen? But if it doesn't fail, which I think there's very little possibility of it failing, then you can say all prices against it will fall forever. And most people will be confused because they're measuring in a fiat instrument where prices are rising.
Okay. This is excellent. I have a whole bunch of threads I want to pull on here. So first of all, you put out a tweet recently. I want to call it up because it kind of summarizes to a degree what you shared. You said the world today makes perfect sense when you understand it is mostly a reflection of a dishonest ledger. As it transitions to an honest ledger, it will make perfect sense, but things will look completely different, which is kind of what you said at the tail end there, that, if we're measuring the system using a faulty denominator, things look a certain way, but it's all relative. What are you measuring relative to? I want to ask about your comment. You said, let's use Bitcoin as the example. It's outside of the system, right? You have confidence as long as it doesn't break.
Yeah.
What do developments like the SEC approving, a Bitcoin futures ETF expose some vulnerabilities because it is an asset that could be bought and sold on an open market, and so in theory could be manipulated price-wise? What do you think about that, Jeff?
So again, some of these, I don't want to give you just a soundbite answer because it's way more, it's more depth than that. But let's use that example and just say, so gold today is manipulated, right? There's paper gold everywhere, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And if you actually tried to drive all of the paper gold, there wouldn't be enough gold, right, to resolve that contract. So essentially, it's a manipulated market tied to the existing system. The difference between gold and Bitcoin is gold, you have to typically, to make use of it, I'm not saying everybody does, but mostly it centralizes. So you're countering on somebody else being a counterparty to you. You don't store it in self-custody. So that same thing, if you did an ETF on BlackRock and most people in the world centralized it, then that's exactly what would happen. But one thing about Bitcoin is most people don't centralize it. And what happens is when that at some point the bill becomes due and people will try to withdraw. That's what ended up happening with FTX. That's what happened with Celsius, a whole bunch of others. And there's more. There's more. Essentially, they've created paper Bitcoin, and somebody thought they were holding Bitcoin, but they weren't holding Bitcoin. So in Bitcoin, when you hear "not your keys, not your coins,"
Yeah.
that's what that self custody instrument is so important in driving the long term value of Bitcoin. And I suspect that because so many people know that today, and it's getting easier and easier to self custody through the technology and different layers that are coming on top of this, that is going to be that's going to be a big part of this. If that becomes a big part of it, then people who play leverage games on top of it, or paper Bitcoin games on top of it, will constantly get liquidated. Whether that's a government, whether that's an ETF, whether that's anybody, it will hit a point. It'll look really good while the market's going straight up, but it'll hit a point, and people will get confused, but then they too will be liquidated when that happens, and there won't be anybody coming in to save them. That's why self custody is such a and it's actually tied to that other thing I talked about, that decentralization and security together. If that's the first time in history we've ever had it, then we're more trusting of the institutions than we should be, and we're less trusting of ourselves and self custody than we should be. And that is a key insight. That is one of the key insights that makes Bitcoin accountable to you. You don't have to trust anybody else.
I publish a weekly newsletter every Sunday. If you would like to subscribe, hit the link right beneath this video. Now, I'm an investor, but I don't write about managing money. I write about managing my mind. Without question, the hardest and most important part of allocating capital through volatility and getting some back. If you want to read my newsletter, hit the link right beneath this video. I know you'll love it. Now back to the interview. Enjoy. That's such a powerful statement. We're more trustworthy in institutions than we should be. And layering that on top of what you just shared, when I think through, the FTX, the Celsius, it's almost, you could almost put that in the box of, these are really good things for the ecosystem because they show people blatantly the importance of self-custody and cold storage, which is, if I interpreted you correctly, the big difference, right? We've had assets like gold. It's, the only asset that is not somebody else's liability, all this stuff, zero counterparty risk. But the issue is, okay, but how many people actually take custody? And therein lies the problem. How much gold is there actually versus how much gold people think they own, which is a big problem. And I agree with you there. And so that makes sense to me. And in that sense, it's like every FTX, every Mt. Gox, every Celsius is kind of good for the ecosystem because it shows people the importance of taking ownership, which is just a great value in general, right? To understand that you have to have your own back. You cannot delegate that to a third-party institution to have your back. And why would you, when self-custody is so simple and becoming simpler?
Yeah, and it really is. But the mental gymnastics people have to go over to be able to believe that they're better than an institution. So think about this in this way. We trust banks with our money, knowing full well our money is losing money in the bank. So we pay fees to be able to lose money in a bank. And then we put regulation on top of that system to protect people from losing their money from a system designed to steal their money. So all of these constructs that we're living in that we think are normal are so abnormal. But we put up with them thinking, and effectively what is ending up happening is people bury their head in the sand and they all believe I can outpace the return of devaluation by putting my money here or here or here. And an entire financial industry grows up, which is now, call it 25% of global GDP, to be able to extract more money from people to be able to tell them where to put their money. It's safer than others, and it's all people don't know it's a long con, but there's no way that long term they're going to outmaneuver the real debasement rate.
So an issue I see with that I want to ask you about is when a fraud happens, when an FTX happens, there's two outcomes. One is that people cry for regulation. The second is that people understand the importance of taking ownership, which is to say self-custody. The better option is that people take ownership. But the more common option is that people cry for help and point the finger and say, we need better regulation. I mean, Kevin O'Leary was, on YouTube saying, I'm marching to Washington to, like
after getting paid tens of millions of dollars from it to be able to promote it, to be able to swindle a whole bunch of other people.
So what gives you the confidence that this won't go that way when we kind of live in a modern nanny state? People love to delegate accountability to anybody else and be protected, which is, and the result.
So I've said this often. I don't expect this to be a quick path. I don't expect this to be. So there's some people that would say that in 2, 3, 4 years, everything's going to be Bitcoin, denominated Bitcoin. That's going to be the way the world looks. I suspect that's not going to be the way the world looks in that time. Now, that doesn't mean you can't live in that world today, because if you're in Bitcoin and say in Bitcoin, all prices will continue to fall. So that William Gibson's quote, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. If you're measuring in Bitcoin, you're already living in the future. And what you realize beyond just the prices falling, and it's going to be volatile, it's actually going to be the exact mirror image of the volatility you see in the existing system. In the existing system, you're seeing prices go up with volatility. And in Bitcoin, you'll see prices falling with volatility. It's a mirror image, but you're already living in that system. One level deeper to that system, if you understand Bitcoin, that all it is an honest ledger, what would the world look like on an honest ledger? And who would you want to do business with each day? What type of people would you want to know? Would you want the people that have done the work to understand it's just an honest ledger, and trade between all humans matters on an honest ledger, and the mere reflection of that world would give incentives to that? Or would you want to live in the dishonest ledger? And what would the mere reflection of the dishonest ledger look like? And so for me, not just the prices falling, all prices falling, including house prices, including all prices are falling in Bitcoin, and they do virtually every year. And they constantly do. More important than that is I'm spending my time on an honest ledger, and the people that you meet that have done the work to understand what I'm saying, you meet them at a different level, because it's not through, like, how could you expect in politics, because politics is just theater today on top of a dishonest ledger, because all parties need to manipulate money faster and faster and faster, no matter what party you're in. So how could you expect voting for that or trying to make more money from it couldn't have bad outcomes when the ledger has to be debased further and further? There's $400 trillion of debt in the world today, and it's already insolvent. So everybody that's spending their time yelling at each other within the existing system are actually empowering the existing system. If 90% of your time, 95% of your time is listening to Fox News or CNN, or you think Trump or Biden or whoever on top of that system, or in Canada, Trudeau or Poilievre, and they might be individually, whoever side you pick, they might be individually decent, but the system itself requires manipulating the ledger to be able to survive. And so what's happening is that ledger is being replaced by an honest ledger over time.
So I need to ask you then, because one of the biggest conversations that occurs on my channel and obviously all of my peers is about BRICS currency alternatives and what might be being created right now. And, if you think through like, why are people asking that question? It's maybe just as simple as, where is the puck going next, right? If the Portuguese real sort of dominated the 15th, 16th century, Dutch guilder 17th, the pound the 18th, the dollar the 19th, like, what's next? And that's what people are trying to answer. What's next? Who's going to take the puck next? But is that the right question to be asking then, Jeff?
So I understand the question, but most people are really bad at doing second, third, or fourth order derivatives. So they look in the next thing that's going to happen instead of the thing that causes. They're terrible at. Most people are really bad in thinking second, third order derivatives. And so what's happening is they're falling into that trap because financial media is falling into that trap, and it sounds like a good soundbite, but without asking what would that look like? So most of these BRIC nations are export nations to the US, right? Or between themselves, right? And they all want more jobs. In other words, they want their labor lower, right? So they can attract the jobs in, because technology is replacing a bunch of these over time. So they're trying to devalue their currency faster than their neighbors to be able to trade. And the US is still primarily the buyer of the world. So if you're selling raw materials to China, so China can produce with low cost labor products that are going to come to the States, be bought by the States, but there's no final buyer, it kind of defeats the purpose. Anyways, now just imagine these different currency units. What do they actually resolve to? Right? Do they resolve? And I know some people are saying, okay, they're going to resolve to gold. And that is actually a potential short-term transition to Bitcoin. But I don't see it as a long-term, because who would trust, how would global nations all get together and trust who has how much gold? And then trust in this system, in this world that we have today, that that they're going to be honest with that system and trade and move the gold when their balance payments can't be met. So I suspect that system also breaks down over time, and more countries, whether it's countries or individuals. I think the best way to look at Bitcoin is it's a bottom up disruption, and all technology is bottom up. So what happens to typically the incumbent in a technology change such as this is they try to protect their monopoly. So those closest to the money monopoly are taking typical steps that a monopoly would do, just similar to what Kodak did when they invented the digital camera and it threatened their monopoly. Ignore it, and it moves from the farthest edges to the people who are most hurt by the monopoly, and then it moves into mainstream. So now, through that lens, what you could see is who has the money monopoly today. US, China, the certain export countries to be able, especially oil, to be able to serve those serve growing energy needs around the world. And who doesn't have the money monopoly? El Salvador didn't, right? Other African countries with rich resources don't. And those countries are likely first to go here. And whether the country does or the country doesn't at first because there's an authoritarian leader that's put into place by one of the main countries I'm talking about, whether the people do, every single person on the planet has a way out, because Bitcoin's an open network, just to move from the system based on theft to a new system, from a system that they are responsible for paying back $400 trillion of insolvent debt to a system where they are not. And so that will likely be driven by people first, then country, then businesses, then countries, each acting in their own best interests from from the bottom up on something that can be stopped.
And okay, so for this to materialize, as you mentioned, it's going to have to go through these stages. I think you said from individuals first, then to businesses, from an adoption standpoint, then to countries. That's how I see it too. I agree with that. Now, what is the role and what is the purpose and maybe future, therefore, that CBDs will play in this evolution, right? Are CBDs, government's sort of last ditch effort to provide this option, or at least the image of it to citizens? Is it, what is the role? What is the sustainability of the CBDC projects? And what do you think is the inevitable outcome?
So I think they'll be tried and they will fail spectacularly.
Okay.
And because all a CBDC is surveillance. It's not money, right? It's really important. Well, like, why is a CBDC needed? CBDC is needed because $400 trillion of debt is already insolvent.
Yeah.
And the only way to make it solvent is to steal it from you. And the only way that you would do that is once you're on a digital ledger and somebody could say, oh, this person has too much wealth in their houses, or I'm going to tax at a different rate and I'm going to press a button and this whole entire group is going to transfer their money back to the state. That is what a CBDC is. And it will be voted for by the majority of a lot of the population because they won't see that coming.
Yes.
So, and once embedded, so the only way away from a CBDC I can see is Bitcoin. The good news, and it's why it's way more important than I'll bet you a lot of your listeners realize, because without Bitcoin, that's what would happen. But by transferring so much control to the state and removing the free market force, then living standards must go down. So again, look all over the world and say, where is communism or state control? That you can't predict people's ideas. You both can't predict what the market is going to look like and people's reaction to the market. That's why the free market does that in a better, more efficient way. And we live on top of that free market. So for a state to take all of that control and essentially say to people, you babysit me, right? Then living standards must go down over time, and individual rights and freedoms are lost. And just for an instance, for all those people that think this is a good thing, what does North Korea look like? Right? What does that state look like when the state can reach into your home and tell you what to think? And if people don't think that that's happening today, they're not as close to, because that's what's happening with kind of what big tech and the state in censoring people. It's already underway. It's massively underway, and that system is dominating your view because most of the people are reinforcing that view and yelling at each other with different sides of that equation from that system and making it stronger all the while. So by dividing against the political process or whatever, going and breaking windows or marching on Wall Street, and then you go home and then magically all the windows are fixed. Where did the money come to do that? It came from your pocket and your ability constantly reinforcing that system. That's why I'm become such a proponent of Bitcoin, because it's the only way out of that dystopia that I can see, and it's a free market force.
Now, when you say most people will still vote for this system, this CBD system, and again, I agree with you. I think it's a really easy sell, unfortunately, to the mainstream public, especially you can provide the smallest incentive to say, switch over to your CBDC account and you'll find, cool $400 waiting for you there. Like, people will take that bait all day long.
UBI through this. Yeah.
Yep. 100%. And I agree. They won't think through the long-term outcome, or won't believe that we could live in such a sort of corrupt surveillance state. I know a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their mind around that we can't trust our elected leaders in the way that maybe we'd love to. and all things are not what they seem. But I think that people will be for it, absolutely. If this moves forward, inevitably decreases the living standard of the average individual, things have to get a lot worse before people start looking for the lifeboat, right? And that's how most empires eventually fracture. Most currencies fail. Things have to get really, really bad. And when I say really, really bad, I mean the wealth gap has to massively widen, much more so than it has today, for there to be a popular uprising and say, but we're seeing the rise of populism right now. And so what would be different, Jeff? What needs to change for the popular uprisings we're seeing today to be a popular uprising out of the system instead of just in the two opposite ends of the same system, if that makes sense?
Yeah. A friend of mine was climbing McKinley, and on the landing on McKinley, the pilot, he saw the plane flipped over, and he asked at the bottom, he goes, I guess that business is out of business, so because all the people died and everything else. I said, no, that's our airline. And then my friend looks at him as that people forget. And so what happens is people get comfortable with their time and space, right? They measure right around, and they hide, and they say, okay, no, my life's not so bad, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And it happens to like frogs boiling in a pot that they don't see it. And you can see this again, if you just zoom out and take yourself out of this. It's so hard to see this because we're the center of our own movie. And we are all the center of we're the star of our own movie, and we're in our heads so much. But if you look at other countries that were also the center of their own movie, different people in those countries, how do they act? So let's look at Argentina today. Right? You got 120% inflation rate. It's way worse. So society's divided. It's terrible. At one time, 50 years ago or 60 years ago, Argentina was the number 4 country in the world as far as GDP. So what's happened? And why are the people still reinforcing a system that looks exactly like we're talking about? Why do they go and elect a leader that they think is going to save them, who removes their individual rights and freedoms and imprisons them? And why do they stay? What does it look like? And when there's an open monetary network that any single person there could move into, yes, Bitcoin is far more adoption in Argentina. And if you looked at it, it's effectively what I'm saying, the same thing, that prices are all falling against it. It's in Argentina pesos, it's setting all-time highs, right? But it's not really moving. Everything's falling against it. But the people there, why is it 90% of the population? Why aren't they on Bitcoin? Because most continue to think there's a solve from the existing system. Now extrapolate out from that. What does that mean from the rest of the world? That means their labor is way cheaper than other nations. And that means business can go back into, assuming a decent political environment or whatever, to safety for business. Business can go into there and take advantage of that cheap labor. And that cheap labor, after having their savings just destroyed, and then it's their entire life savings destroyed, now they start the game again, and they think they're winning again, and then they'll have their savings destroyed again. So why do most people get caught? Because our minds don't change very fast. We think that we believe all of the news, everything that we're listening to, and we keep reinforcing that system. And if the news tells us Bitcoin is bad or bad for the environment or everything else, we'll bias that and not do our own work to see if that's true or not. We'll just believe it. And so few people move, and then more people move. So just like what we were talking about with Celsius or FTX, these waves create one of two outcomes: reinforce the system, protect me, or I'm going to take individual accountability, and I'm going to learn why. For the people that take individual accountability and learn why, and paving the way for the future, they bring more and more people on board, and eventually, over a longer time horizon, this changes.
You make me think about this concept, like push, pause leadership style, where you give people a little shove into an area they're uncomfortable with, they put up with it. You give another little shove into an area they're uncomfortable with, they put up with it. And then one more shove, and they start to stand up and say, what's going on here? So you pause, right? You let things kind of let people calm down, and people become accustomed to this new normal. What was uncomfortable is now normal, uncomfortable. So then you push them again.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit uncomfortable, and you push them again. They're a little bit uncomfortable, and then once they speak up, you pause, right? And you can really move a population with that strategy, and it's been proven time and time again throughout history. And one of the reasons why people don't leave during civil wars, right, is that things become incrementally uncomfortable,
Right.
not
Exactly.
overnight, right? Like, and so that's got to apply to an attachment to a system as well, right? It's almost like this loss aversion mentality. I can't jump ship. I've been here my whole life. We've been using this system, right? My parents use this system. My kids are going to grow up on this system.
It's
Right?
it's mostly good. Look, relative to other countries, we live in the better part. So it's okay. It's, even though it's based on theft, it's better than those other people. And so we compare that, and we get stuck, and we don't realize it. And then a lot of people complain about the very system. They spend all their time complaining about that very system, making it stronger.
Yeah. Your comment relative to other countries, like that is so powerful right now. And the reason it struck me is because we all went through this exercise over the last few years where it kind of sucked no matter where you were, right? Various mandates, restrictions on your life and freedom and all this. No matter where you were, life was worse. It sucked. But every country did a pretty good job at telling you it was worse elsewhere, right? And, Canadian media was filled with the situations in Australia. American media was filled with the situations in Canada, and every national media outlet was pointing the finger at other countries. And, for example, I have a brother-in-law in Southern California, and we were just down there, and he was like, is it really as bad up there as it's being made out to be? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, Canada's become a bit of a dictatorship. And I'm like, what? Like, yeah, I don't love our leader either, but like, listen, it's the same as in America in terms of how we go through our day to day. But the understanding of how bad things are everywhere else is a really powerful tool. And when leveraged effectively, absolutely just makes you grateful for where you are. And it might be worse today than it was a year ago, but given where else I could live in the world, I'm perfect right here, right?
That's what you asked before we started this interview, that I've been traveling for the last couple of years. That's why I wanted to see in my,
Interesting.
so I was so tired of living in that over and over in my kids, my life. I just said, I'm out. I'm gonna work from the road. I'm going to travel the world, put my kids in online school, and we did that as a family. It was remarkable. It didn't look anything like people said it looked like in these other regions. Nothing like it.
Yeah, no doubt. And similarly, if I just went out the headlines that I read about California, I would have thought I was walking into some overwhelming woke nation. Turns out
Yeah.
it's the California I visited 5-10 years ago. Same place,
Right.
more or less, right? Subtle changes. Okay, so maybe as we're wrapping up here, I know you got to jump in about 10 minutes. Are you going to stay in Canada, Jeff? Are you comfortable here? You've been traveling a ton. You've experienced, you could take your family anywhere, right? My family's going abroad again in February. We're going to spend about a year in Bali for a handful of reasons, quality of life being one. There's something about a cash economy that gives me a bit of comfort as well. I'm not sure why, but what's your take on where you got a young family?
Yeah. So Bitcoin gives you flexibility, right? It gives you, so you can move anywhere in the world in an instant, and your wealth can't be taken. You can remember 12 words in your head. You have mobility anywhere, and nobody can take that from you. So, but when we saw lockdowns and everything else, and when we saw the truckers protests, and when we see the bills restricting freedoms and saying what the government can do to say this is okay to say, this isn't okay to say, and essentially we wouldn't see it.
Yes.
And you start to reinforce how much control starts to happen. It makes me, and I think it should make others, more open to be, and more I want to be more flexible. So we are looking at kind of golden visa regions around the world, and kind of that flag theory, having another passport to be able to, if we needed to move somewhere quickly, we would. I don't expect that to happen in Canada. on a really fast time frame. I love where I live. I love friends and everything else that I have here. But I think it is incumbent on on everyone to, if they have the means, to be able to build flexibility, to build some flexibility into what's coming. The world's going to be, if you're measuring the world from the existing system, which predominantly people do, it's going to seem really chaotic. It's going to get a lot worse.
And, a good step for people that are wondering, because, is to start practicing, take baby steps. You just spent the last couple of years traveling, testing other locations, geographies, economies, cultures, communities, all of this stuff. Because uprooting your life seems monumental and very overwhelming. So as an exercise, I got 3 young kids. It's quite disruptive to uproot our life, right? But we started with a month, right? And then we did 2, and you can kind of get a sense of like, what is this going to take, right? Yeah. Similar to like, I have some, doom and gloomers on my show every now and then. And they talk about the value of homesteading skills, right? And how we should be able to grow our own food and become self-reliant. And I'm like 100%. But this doesn't happen overnight. You don't buy the acreage if you grew up in the metropolis. Like, don't do that.
Right.
Like
right.
It's a lot of work. You're gonna fall on your face. But start with a basil plant. Like, just start small. Do the balcony garden, do the backyard garden. Like, if you want to go down that path, but it's a multi-year process of learning, just like all this stuff, right? And anyways, it just struck me when you're walking through that, and I thought, yeah, like we used to think it would be impossible to get away for a year, but after a couple of trips, it's like, oh yeah, it's actually
not bad at all.
Feasible. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And with the abundance of really awesome remote education platforms that are launching, I mean, I would love to spend another hour with you just talking about disruptive tech that you're watching, because I know you watch a ton of stuff, but education's one that's really caught my eye. And obviously remote learning's been growing for the last 3 years, have been like gas on a fire. And there's all kinds of cool alternatives now for homeschooling or unschooling, and all kinds of new platforms that are quite unique and neat.
Yeah, it's a derivative of what we're talking about now. Like, so this Zoom we're on right now, we wouldn't have been able to do 10 or 15 years ago, and it wouldn't have been able to touch hundreds of thousands, millions of people.
Yeah.
And so when I say prices fall to the marginal cost of production, this is what I'm talking about, and we benefit as a result. And if we didn't benefit, we wouldn't use it, right? So all of that, if you think about what's happening broadly in tech, that's happening at an exponential rate in every single industry. That should be, every year you should be able to get more and work less. That's the natural state of things. But we're wired into the exact opposite state of things, where you have to work, except for a very small percentage of the population that wins because of that, at least in this time, until it'll be taken back from them through CBDC. Most people are working more, getting less. And so when you put entire planet of people into that situation, which is really modern day slavery, because somebody gets to steal your money, you obviously have the effect of it feeling chaotic, as people are saying, forget, I'm not doing this anymore.
Okay, I know I said last question, but just because some of the stuff you said there, would you expect, as part of this transition period, for us to experience astronomical tax rates that would be hard for us to imagine? But, when FDR was in the president's seat, I think the highest tax bracket of the United States was 80% or 81%. Like, can you imagine? I mean, what that means is that, you're working 8 days for free, then you get paid for 2. Then you work 8 days for free and you get paid for 2. I mean, that's how that works in reality. Is that something you would expect?
Yeah, again, a combination of, so as you steal from most of the population, because inflation is wage deflation, right? So if you're trying to save money for retirement or anything else, your real wages are going down. If you're parking them in assets like real estate, then they're mostly hedged against that. And real estate has now attracted a massive premium, to be able to be a savings that can't be stolen away. So it is taken away. But as it continues down that path, that's why I think second, third order consequences of that, then the only way to essentially all of the people at the bottom that have been taken from, and a very small number of people that have concentrated the assets in either real estate or things that are within that country, they will be taken back through force or through massive taxation.
Yes.
But they will be taken back because there's a bigger population who will vote to take them back. And
that cycle you can find countless times throughout history.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so I think so. One quick thing I'd just say, if for people that are listening to this, I wrote 2 articles on my site beside my book. So at jeffbooth.ca, there's 2 articles one's called The Greatest Game, one's called Finding Signal in a Noisy World. Read them in that order, and you could see, going back years ago, the predictions I made and where we are in the cycle of The Greatest Game, and then Finding Signal in a Noisy World. And I would say this: most people are really bad risk allocators, and because they don't measure the risk inherent in their own system. They would just measure the risk in the new. If you think a quarter, a tenth, if you think there's a 1% chance that I'm right on this, and your allocation to Bitcoin is 0, I would say you're making a huge risk mistake. From there, learn why I'm saying this. Do the work to be able to understand why this is important. And I suspect that as you do, you'll increase your weighting, and probably over time also increase kind of how how positive you are on the future, because you'll see more people that are really positive on the future there.
Yeah, I like that as a closing note. And if nothing else, you operate differently psychologically by knowing you have a lifeboat. Like, just by knowing you have it, everything, right. You make different decisions, less short-term thinking, less reactive, right? You think smarter, think longer term, for a whole bunch of reasons. The Greatest Game and Finding Signal in a Noisy World. I'm going to put links beneath this content so people can check those out. But jeffbooth.ca is also where you can find them. Jeff, it's always a blast having you on. Thanks for making the time. I love chatting with you, man.
Yeah, great seeing you.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now, if you want to take the next step, I publish a weekly newsletter and it's free. There's a link to subscribe right beneath this video, and you can join me and 50,000 other investors weekly for this exclusive content where I share my key action items and takeaways from conversations just like this and plenty others. Thanks for stopping by.